All right, my students, so here we go. So when we're doing adding and subtracting, multiplying and dividing with fractions, there's a lot of questions to ask and things to do. Adding and subtracting, there's a lot to do, and it's probably one of the hardest to really set up and do. Multiplication should be the easiest to do. However, we have a lot to learn in this lesson. Some tricks to the trade, if you will, on making sure that we can multiply fractions. We always start with questions. The simple question, well, am I able to multiply fractions? That answer, just like the previous ones, and this is the second set of questions, yes, I can. Well, how do I do it? Well, when I do it, I'm going to multiply straight across. All right. Then when I'm done, I'm going to reduce and or simplify the answer. Now, that sounds pretty easy, right? Well, it is, other than we don't just have straight fractions. We have whole numbers, and we have mixed numbers, which are whole numbers and fractions together, and we got to know how to do those. So let's make sure we're following along, we're paying attention, we're taking our notes, we're doing everything that Mr. Barker asked us to do, because some of this can be really hard if we aren't focused. Pencil in hand, ears engaged, brains turned on, muscle memory being built as we work through this. Sasha still has 4/5 of a scarf left to knit. If she finishes 1/2 of, keyword of means multiply, the remaining part of the scarf today, how much of the scarf will Sasha knit today? So they show us, we're going to multiply this basic 1/2 times 4/5. Can I multiply fractions? Yes, I can. How do I do it? I multiply straight across. All right, that seems easy enough. 1 times 4 is 4, and 2 times 5 is 10. Yeah, we can do that. 4/10, easy enough. And then, that third step, reduce if I can, or simplify, which means I have a top heavy, right? My numerator is bigger than my denominator, and I got to divide to find the answer. This one is just reducing, and I know they're both even. 2 goes into both of them. So 2 goes into 4 2 times, and 2 goes into 5 5 times. So how much of it does she have left? Well, she has 2/5 of the scar left for today. All right, we can do that. But here's where it's really going to get tricky. So please follow along so we can do the basic stuff. We have something new today, something that I don't believe that even 5th grade teaches you, and if they do, I apologize, not to step on their toes. But I know it's 6th grade and it's part of our standards. We got to make sure we know how to do this stuff. If I have a mixed number, that is a whole number with a fraction, I got to follow these steps so I know exactly what to do. So this is going to be included on that paper I gave you with the previous lesson, where I asked the questions on adding fractions. I asked the questions on subtracting fractions. This lesson, ask the question on multiplication of fractions. Then we'll have division next, but these steps are going to be with that paper, so you might get it out just so you know what we're talking about. All right, so here's my steps. I start at the bottom, I multiply, I add, then I keep my denominator. Well, what does that mean? Let's start with 3 3/5. So I'm going to start at the bottom every single time. And what that means is I go to the denominator. And when I start at the denominator, then I'm going to go clockwise. If you don't know what that means, look at that clock up there for a couple seconds and watch the direction of the second hand. Okay? Clockwise means I'm going to go in this direction. So I'm going to start, and my first step is going to be to multiply. So I'm going to take 5 times 3 and get an answer. And I write it up here in just a small form. That's 15, right? 5 times 3 is 15, easy enough. My second step says then I'm going to add. So now I'm going to add that 15 to my numerator. Well, 5 plus 3 is what? 18, right? That becomes my numerator. My final step, keep the denominator. So this 5 gets put right over here. You might notice that's top heavy. That's an improper fraction. And that's correct. And I can't have that in an answer. However, as I kind of mentioned on the previous video, I can have top heavy fractions, improper fractions, if I need to use it in a math problem, or if I'm doing rates and ratios and things like that. I cannot multiply by a mixed number. I have to have it in fraction form and only in fraction form, and therefore I have an improper fraction to work with. Let's look at it again. So if I have 2.5, how does that work? Well, I'm going to start at the bottom and I'm going to multiply. So I'm going to multiply the bottom, the denominator, by the whole number. So I have 2 times 2. That equals 4. Then I add. So I take my 4 that I got and I add it to the numerator. And 2 plus 1, well, that gives me 5. That's my new numerator. Then I keep the denominator of 5/2. So on your piece of paper, what I'd like you to do is just practice. What is this going to be? Pause the video, try it, then unpause, and I'll talk you through it. So hopefully you have an improper fraction, because that's what we have to have. We have to have fractions in order to multiply fractions. Okay? So the first thing you should have done is picked up your handy dandy calculator and typed in 16 times 9 equals. Well, I start at the bottom. 16 times 9 is equal to what? 16 times 9 is equal to 144. And then the next one was add. So I'm going to take my 144 and add 1, and I should have gotten a numerator of 145. And then you would have kept your denominator of 16. So hopefully you got that, and if not, look at my steps and figure out why. Going on, because we need to know that to do this stuff. Multiply 1 1/4 times 1 2/3. Write the product in simplest form. So I may have to convert it into a mixed number, change it from an improper fraction, or I may have to reduce it. Simplest form, I may have to do both. So the first thing I have to do is I cannot use these in a math problem. So I have to go through those steps. I have to start at the bottom, and I have to multiply. 4 times 1 is 4. And then I have to add. 4 plus 1, that gives me 5. I keep my denominator of 4. So this first one should be 5/4. Now I go to my second one. All right. Once again, mixed number, can't use it. Start at the bottom. 3 times 1, well, 3 times 1 is 4. Or excuse me, 3. There we go. And 3 plus 2, got to get caught up with my mouth and my clicking. 3 plus 2 gives me 5. So now I have a numerator of 5, and I keep my denominator of 3. Now I have regular fractions that I can multiply. I have 5/4 and I have 5/3. How do I multiply? I multiply straight across. So I take 5 times 5 and I get 25, and 4 times 3 is 12. That's getting to my answer, and I cannot have improper fractions in my answer. So now I may have to convert it into a mixed number. I may have to reduce it. I may have to do both together. So in simplest forms, I start with my numerator in the division box. I divide by my denominator. 12 goes into 25 2 whole times, because 2 times 12 is 24. When I subtract it, I have a remainder of 1. My remainder is my numerator. My divisor, the number on the outside, is my denominator. I can't reduce it. 1's as low as I can go. So I know that my answer is 2 1/12. Moving on. All right, so now on this one, I have, parentheses, adding fractions. Wow, we got to think back, don't we? So we have done, I've introduced you to the order of operations. Asked for several extra presents from my dear Aunt Sally. I have to remember these steps, and I have to do them in order. I don't have any absolute value. I don't have any square roots. I don't have any exponents, but I do have parentheses. So I know I have to start with parentheses. Now, when I look at it, I've got a 6, a whole number inside, right? So anytime I'm multiplying, not only can I not have a mixed number, whole number or fraction, I also can't have a whole number. So I got to take my 6 and I have to put it over 1. Every whole number goes over 1. Don't confuse it. Don't turn it upside down and put the 1 on top. Because 6 over 1 means that I get 6 donuts. If I flip it, then that means I get 1/6 of a donut. And I don't get to keep this figure if I only eat 1/6 of a donut. So I'm going to make sure that I put my 6 over 1, and then I can start inside my parentheses. Notice they brought that down because I have to solve my parentheses first. When I have my 6 over 1, Then I have my basic multiplication. Can I multiply fractions? Yes, I can. How do I do it? Multiply straight across. So 6 times 1 is going to give me 18, and 1 times 8 is going to give me 8. All right, so if that's the case, I'm going to take what I have for my parentheses and put it right next to what is left. I bring it down. Now I have addition of fractions. Previous lesson, right? Can I add fractions? Yes. What do I have to have? Common denominator. Do I have it? No. They didn't make it easy on me. So if you see, they are multiplying by opposite denominators. I see that I have a 5, so we're multiplying by 5s. I see that I have an 8, so I'm multiplying by 8s. Then I come up and rename my fractions. So 5 times 8 is 40, got it. 4 times 8 is 32, got it. What I don't have is this other one, so 8 times 5 is my 40, and 18 times 5, handy dandy calculator, type it in, is 90. All right, so adding fractions. Do I now have my common denominator? Yes. What do I do with it? I'm going to keep it, and then I add. Remember, do not add denominators. It stays the same. When I add my numerators in, 90 plus 32 is 122, and now I have an improper fraction. So this shows me I'm going to reduce. Well, I'm going to reduce by 2s because it's even, right? So I end up with 122 divided by 2 gives me 61, and 40 divided by 2 is 20. Still an improper fraction. If I check, there's nothing else that I can reduce by, so I'm going to simply do my division and make it an M or a mixed number. So my numerator, this is why that extra box is out to the side, has to be divided by my denominator. When I take 61 and I divide it by 20, 20 goes into 61 3 times, because 3 times 20 is 60. When I subtract it, I have a 1 remainder. So I know I have a whole number of 3. My remainder, once again, becomes my numerator. My divisor becomes my denominator. So my final answer is just simply 3 and 1/20. But I have a lot that I have to remember. I have to remember the whole numbers always go over 1. I have to remember that if I have a mixed number, I'm going to have to multiply and add and then keep my denominator. I have to remember that follow the order of operations, right? This lesson can become very tricky if you're not paying attention to me and following along. There's not a lot of new stuff to teach. There's really 3 new things to teach, but it's adding everything that we've really talked about up to this point and making sure that we understand it. All right, so here's our questions. Once again, can I multiply? Yes. How I multiply across, and then I simplify or reduce. Once again, a whole number of 6. Cannot have whole numbers, right? So I have to put my 6 over my 1. That's impossible, or it's impossible to do if I don't. So it's very important that I put it over 1. If you don't know why I'm putting it over 1 because you were daydreaming and not following along, rewind it to the previous one at the beginning of that problem so you understand the importance of that. If I multiply across, then I have 6 times 3, which is 18, and 1 times 8, which is 8. All right, so that's basic, fraction, but I have 2 even numbers, don't I? So I need to reduce. Well, what can I reduce by? Well, they're both even, and so I can reduce by 2's, and 2 goes into 18 9 times, and 2 goes into 8 4 times, and I can't reduce any further, can I? Okay, so now I'm left with an improper fraction, which I can't have. So that's the 3rd step. Simplify or reduce. I'm going to take my 9, my numerator, divide it by my denominator, my 4. 4 goes into 9 2 whole times, because 2 times 4 is 8. And when I subtract, I get a remainder of 1. My remainder becomes my numerator, and my divisor becomes my denominator. So I have my numerator, I have my denominator, and I keep my whole number. So I have 2 1/4 as my answer. All right, so what about number 2? Okay, there's no whole numbers, there's no mixed numbers, so can I multiply? Yes, how? Straight across, right? So 3 times 8 and 8 times 9. All right, easy enough. So I have 24 over 72. Now I put that 8 out there. Why did I put an 8 out there? Well, because if I think about my factors of numbers, 8 will go into both of those, right? I can reduce by 8s. If I don't reduce by 8, then what I would end up doing is reducing by 2, and then it's even, and reducing by 2, and then it's still even, and reducing by 2 again. So if I reduce by 8 in my first step, then I only have to reduce it one time, and I end up with 3/9. But if I need to reduce and then reduce and then reduce, I'm still going to get to 3/9. More than one way to do a math problem. Either way, you're successful. When I get to 3/9, then I can see that 3 will go into 3 and 3 will go into 9. So then I can reduce once again. I can reduce by 1/3. So what big number could I reduce by and do it in one step? Some of you might have seen it. Some of you may not have. If I take 8 times 3, I get 24. And if I type it into my calculator, I would see that I could have, if I wanted to do it in one step, just reduce by 24. Because 24 goes into 24 one time. And when I type it into my handy dandy calculator, 72 divided by 24 equals, I see that 24 goes into 72 3 even times. But 1/3, either way, no matter how many times you reduce it, is going to be your correct answer. All right, so 3, they give us a story problem. Sam and his friends ate 3 3/4 bags of fruit snacks. If each bag contained 2 1/2 ounces, how many ounces of fruit snacks did Sam and his friends eat? So ounces of fruit snacks. That of, once again, about 80% of the time we see it in a math problem, is going to be multiplication. So I know this is a multiplication fact. I have 3 3/4 bags of fruit. I have 2 1/2 ounces that I'm going to use, but I cannot do that because I can't multiply. Some people try. Some people try to multiply 3 and 2 and get 6, and then multiply 3/4 and 1/2 and get that answer, and then add those together. It doesn't work, I promise. So let's do what we know to do that I introduced to you just a couple of minutes ago. On your paper, once again, I have the steps for you. I go to the bottom, I multiply, I add, that's my new numerator. And then I keep my denominator. So, start at the 4. I'm going to have 4 times 3. 4 times 3 is indeed 12. Add my 3 to it. 12 plus 3 is going to give me 15. Keep my denominator. So my denominator is 4. Got to do the second one too, right? So I have 2 1/2. Start at the bottom, multiply, then add. So 2 times 2 is my 4. And then I add my 1, and that becomes my new numerator. So 4 plus 1 is 5. Keep my denominator of 2. Now I can do my math. Now I have 15/4 times 5/2. I can do that because I know to multiply straight across. 15 times 5 is going to give me 75, and 4 times 2 is going to give me 8. Improper fractions. A lot of steps here, right? If I'm going too fast, just pause the video and then keep going. My last step then is going to be to convert it into a mixed number, to change it into. So reducing and simplifying anytime I can. My numerator goes inside my division box. My my denominator becomes my divisor, and then I divide. Well, 8 goes into 75 9 even times, right? Because 9 times 8 is 72. So that gives me a remainder of 3, and then I know how to create my fraction. So I have a whole number of 9. My remainder is my numerator. My divisor is my denominator. And then it's a story problem, so notice I added ounces to it. 9 3/8 ounces would be the correct answer. Well, now we've got these order of operations, right? We're going to practice these because you're going to have them on your homework. Remember, I have you work some on your own, so make sure we're paying attention. So my order of operations, once again, tells me to do any absolute value, square root, exponents, or parentheses first. So I have to start with 3/4 minus 1/2. All right, yesterday's lesson. Can I subtract fractions? Yes. Do I have a common denominator? No. Create the common denominator. All right, so I'm going to start here. I'm going to have my 3/4 minus 1/2. The easiest way to come up with the common denominator is just to multiply by opposite denominators. So if I have a 4, I'm going to multiply by 4s. And if I have a 2, I'm going to multiply by 2s. Whatever I end up with here, then I have to do my last step and multiply by 3/5. When I multiply and rename these then, I end up with 2 times 3 is 6, and 2 times 4 is 8. Then I multiply by my 4s. 4 times 1 is 4, and 4 times 2 is 8, and then I subtract. Now I'll be honest, if you don't pay attention to what you're doing and you make sure you copy down the right signs and stuff, you'll do it wrong. Because luckily I checked this before I started recording. I had added and my answer was completely wrong. So make sure you do what it says to do. So when I subtract then, I have 6 minus 4 gives me 2, and 8 minus 8. I don't do that, right? I keep my denominator. So it's just 2 8s. All right, so now, when I have 2 8s, then I have to multiply it to my 3/5. That's going to be my last step. How do I multiply? Straight across, right? So 2 times 3 is 6. 8 times 5 is 40. My last step was reduce or simplify if I can. It's a regular fraction, meaning it's not improper, but I can reduce. I know that 2 will go into 6, and that's an even number also, so I'm going to divide by 2 top and bottom. 2 goes into 6 3 times, and 2 goes into 40 20 times. That's as far as I can reduce, so 3/20 is my correct answer. All right. This one doesn't have any parentheses, so I'm going to start with adding 1/3 plus 4/9, right? Nope, because I remember that I multiply and divide first before I do any adding and subtracting. I have to start here even though there's not parentheses. So you'll always see me put brackets where I need to start when I don't have parentheses, just so I can keep track of what I'm doing. The other thing I notice is I have a whole number in a multiplication and a fraction problem, which I know I also can't do. So when I set it up, I have to have my 4/9 times my 12/1. I went ahead and put parentheses because you have to act like it's parentheses, even though they're not actually given to you. But when I multiply fractions, how do I do it? I multiply straight across. So I'm going to take my 4 times my 12 and my 9 times my 1, and that's going to give me 48/9. Now, I have 1/3, right? I have to remember that this is my last step. So I know I have 1/3 plus whatever this is equal to. Well, 48/9. Can I add fractions? Yes. Do I have the same denominator? Nada. No, I don't. Got to create a common denominator. Well, if I multiply by opposite denominators, I can do that. Here's a 9, so I multiply top and bottom by 9. Here's a 3, so I multiply top and bottom by 3. Then, use my handy-dandy calculator, it becomes easier. So I know I'm going to have 27 as my common denominator, right? And I'm adding. So 9 times 3 is 27, and 9 times 3 is 27, so they match. 9 times 1 is 9, and 48 times 3, no idea off the top of my head. But if I type it in my calculator, I get 144. Now I have my common denominator. So what do I do with it? I got to keep it in my answer, right? So 27 is my common denominator. When I add 144 and 9, I get 153. Then I'm going to do some division. 153, my numerator goes inside, divided by my denominator. And now I'm going to divide. I type it into my handy-dandy calculator. What do I get? 5 and stuff, right? So my 5 times 27, getting rid of the stuff, gives me 135. And then I subtract and get a remainder of 18. 18 is my numerator. 27 is my denominator. But what do I notice? Hopefully I notice. If you don't notice right away, do a quick check of your divisibility rules. They're not both even, so 2 won't go into them. 1 plus 8 is 9. 3 will go into 9. 2 plus 7 is 9, and 3 will go into 9 also, won't it? So I'm going to divide by, 9. So going back to 1.1a on my divisibility rules, if 3 will go into their sum, then 3 is divisible by 3, excuse me. If 9 will go into their sums, 1 plus 8 is 9 and 2 plus 7 is 9, then 9 will also go into them. So if I reduce by 9, I can do it in one step. If not, I would have seen that I had to go ahead and divide by 9 again. So when I end up with 9 and 9 going into both of them, I end up with a numerator of 2 and a denominator of 3. That gives me 5 2/3 as my final answer. A lot of steps, right? We're getting into some major steps of mathematics. And as long as we're paying attention, brains are engaged, taking notes step by step, following along. We're building that muscle memory, and I know we're learning. We're going to be just fine. So once again, order of operations, there's no absolute value, square root, exponent, or parentheses, but we have to pretend there is. Because I have multiplication and division listed first that I have to do first. So that means I have to do my 5/8 times my 7/10. And how do I multiply fractions? Multiply straight across. So I pretend there's parentheses there. You don't have to add them when you write it down, but it might help you just to remember what you're supposed to be doing. When I multiply straight across then, 5 times 7 is 35 and 8 times 10 is 80. Then I have subtraction. So when I have my subtraction of 1/4, I know whatever this answer was has to be in front. Can I subtract fractions? Yes. Do I have a common denominator? No. Multiply by my opposite denominators. So I have 80, so I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 80. And I have a 4, so I'm going to multiply my top and bottom by 4. Remembering that whatever I get is what I'm going to subtract from one another. So when I do that multiplication, I get denominators of 320. 4 times 35 is 140, and 1 times 80 is 80. Now I can subtract. I keep my denominator anytime I add and subtract, so I know my denominator is 320. And then when I type into my handy dandy calculator 140 minus 80, I get 60. All right? So now when I go to reduce, I might find that I can reduce by 20s. That would probably be my easiest step. Maybe you don't see that. Maybe you see they both end with zeros, so we cross those out. Maybe you said, well, they both end with zeros, so I'm going to reduce by 10. Then I'd have to reduce by 2. But if I cross off my zeros, then I still have even numbers, and I have to reduce by 2 to give me my 3 on my top. But my first step, if I do it in one giant step, then 20 is my largest. It's my greatest common factor between the two. Once again, I do not care which way you do it. I don't care if you do it in 2-step reducing or one giant step reducing. As long as you get to the right answer, you understand it. That's the key to mathematics. 20 is my greatest common factor between the two, though. So if I reduce, then 20 goes into 63 times, 20 goes into 320 16 times, and that is my final answer. All right, so I'm going to go to number 7. Now, we did 3 different things, right? We had 2 math functions to do. Well, now we're going to do 4 different things. I've got 3 different math functions to do. And I have to start with my parentheses. According to my order of operations, it's first. So I'm going to start there. So I'm going to start with my addition. Do I have common denominators? No. So I'm going to multiply by opposite denominators. Here's a 6, so I multiply by 6s. Here's an 18, so I multiply by 18s. Handy dandy calculators, type it in and tells me that's going to give me denominators of 108. My numerators then, 6 times 5 is 30, 18 times 1 is 18. All right, so now I have common denominators, right? What do I do with it? I keep it, and then I can add my numerators. So my 108 stays the same. 30 plus 18 is 48. Now sometimes when we get into these really big ones, it's easier to go ahead and reduce what I can. So let's go ahead and reduce this one. Now, I might go step by step where I have to reduce by 2 because it's even, then it's even again. So I reduce by 2 again, and then I see that 3, by my divisibility rules, will go into both of those answers. Okay? Nothing wrong with that, and that's fine. But maybe you see a large number that will go into both. Okay? When I reduce, I could just reduce by 12. Notice, if I take 2 times 2, I get 4, and 4 times 3 is 12. That tells me my greatest common factor of these two numbers is indeed 12. Once again, I don't care which way you do it, as long as you get to the right answer. If I want to do it in one step, though, I'll reduce by 12s. And 12 goes into 48 4 times. And 12 goes into 108 9 times. Now what do? Well, this 4/9 is the same thing as sitting right here in this math problem, right? So then I'm left with 3 times the 4/9 plus the 2/5. So that means, according to my order of operations with my 4/9, my next step has to be multiplication and division from left to right. So I have to multiply by 3. We got a problem, don't we? We have a fraction multiplied by a whole number. I can't do that. Got to put it over 1. Once again, there's a lot of things we're learning on this lesson. So I'm going to put my 3, but I have to put it over 1 so I can indeed multiply my fractions. 3 times 4, because I'm multiplying across, is going to be 12. And 1 times 9, because I'm multiplying across, is going to be 9. All right, so now I found the answer for this. What's left? Now I got to add 2/5. So I keep my fraction. But if I want to make it easier for me in the long run, I could go ahead and reduce. 3 will go into both of those numbers. So if I do it now, then I don't usually have to do it at the very end, as long as I reduced as far as I could throughout my problem. If I didn't do this step here where I'm reducing by 12, I'm going to be ending up with some really big numbers. And once again, that's okay also if that's what you prefer, as long as when you get to the end, you simplify down to the lowest form. If I reduce now, then I can take 12 divided by 3 is 4 and 9 divided by 3 is 3. That's going to be my lowest form at this point. Then I can add my 2/5 to it. So I'm taking what this answer is for all of this, which is my 4/3, and then I'm doing my last step, which is adding 2/5 to it. Adding fractions, I can add fractions, but I have to have common denominators, which I don't have. So I'm going to multiply by my opposite denominators. Here's a 5, I multiply by 5s. Here's a 3, I multiply by 3s. I know whatever I get for those two answers, I'm going to add together. So I do my multiplying. I know my denominator is going to be 15 for each of them, and 5 times 4 is 20. And then this 15 I have for a numerator of 2 times 3, which is 6. So now I have my common denominator, which I keep because that's the rules of adding and subtracting. So I have a denominator of 15, and then I add my numerators. 20 plus 6 is 26. Improper fractions. Notice how long this is taking. It's a lot of steps. This is where I really suggest, especially to those of you that write really big, get the extra paper that I provide for you and include it with your work so I can keep track and you can get credit for doing this work. Now I'm going to have to reduce and convert wherever I can. I know that it's improper, so my 26 goes inside my division box and I'm dividing by 15. 15 only goes into 26 one time, and 1 times 15 is 15, so I have a remainder. My remainder is 11. So if my remainder is 11, I know that's my numerator, and my divisor is 15, so that's my denominator, and I keep my whole number of 1. Then I see if I can reduce, and I can't, because 11 is a prime number, right? My first 5 primes, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, and 11 won't go into 15 evenly. So 1 and 11/15 is as low as I can go. All right, so guess what 8 and 9 are? That's for you. So I want you to take the time and work these out, and if there's not enough room, please have the extra paper. Work through them, find out what the answers are. There's 3 different ones here that I want you to do, and then I'm going to have you do one more. Pause the video, come up with an answer. If you want to go one by one, that's fine. Just make sure you pause in between. Come back to me when you have your work. All right, so on number 8, hopefully you instantly thought, well, I can't do that, so I have to go through those first steps that Mr. B taught me. Go to the bottom, multiply, add, that's my numerator, keep my denominator. So you took 3 times 1, which is 3, plus 2, which is 5, and you kept your denominator of 3. So you now have 5/3. And then on 2 and 5/8, you did your multiply. 8 times 2 is 16, plus your add. 16 plus 5 is 21. Kept your denominator of 8. So now you had your multiplication. You had 5/3 and 21/8, and you multiply across. Now, this is easy for me to do because I can shrink my font, but that would be really hard if you don't have that extra paper. When you multiply across then, you take 5 times 21, which is 105, 3 times 8, which is 24. And then you have to change it, right? You have to make that mixed number. And reduce if you can, but 24 goes into 105 4 whole times, because 4 times 24 is 96. And then when you subtract, you have a remainder of 9 and a denominator of 24. But the thing that I hope you noticed was those can both be reduced. Maybe you noticed it back, before earlier and you did some reducing, but at least if you did it here, because it could have been reduced back here at the 105 over 24. But 3 goes into 9 3 times, and 3 goes into 8, or 24 8 times. So your final answer should have been 4 3/8. All right, so now the next one should have been a little bit easier. So our rules for multiplying, I can do it. I multiply across, I reduce or simplify when I need to. So if I just multiply across, I have 4 times 4, which is 16, and 9 times 5, which is 45, and they're not even. And 3 does not go into 7, because 1 times 6 is 7. And 9 doesn't go into 7, and there's nothing that's going to go into either one of them evenly. So 16/45 is your final answer. Now on this question, it was the calico cat. Some of us struggled last week when we had the of question, and I kept asking you, well, what does of mean? And a couple of you didn't remember, and that's fine. If you come to me and have a question, and I ask you, well, what does of mean? You don't have to stand there for 5 minutes and hear crickets chirping because you don't remember. Just say, well, I don't remember. And I'll continue to help you. Okay? 80% of the time that we have of in a math problem, of means to multiply. So I have actually 2 questions here that I have to answer. What fraction of the pets are calico cats? And then the second one, how many of the pets are calico cats? So we start with our fractions. I have 5 6 and 4/5. Now I can multiply fractions, and I just multiply across. So 5 times 4 is 20, and 6 times 5 is 30, and then I'm going to reduce. Now I can divide by 10, or I just chop off those zeros at the end, because that's the easiest way to reduce. So I know that question number 1, what fraction of the pets are calico? I know that 2/3 are calicos. But how many is that? That's the second question. So I have to look at what I'm talking about. I'm talking about 90 pets, and I'm still talking about of, because I have 2/3 of those that are calico cats. So out of the pets, I know that I can't use pets as a whole number. So hopefully you put it over 1. And then we looked at it, and we just multiplied across. And we get 2 times 90, which is 180, and 3 times 1, which is 3. And then when we divide, we get an even number, don't we, for question 2? So hopefully when you divided, you found out that 60 of the 90 pets are calico cats. All right, so now I want you to look at these. Work on these, see what your answers are. Remember your order of operations, that's the hint. And if you don't remember them, out the paper that I gave you and told you to keep in your math folder. Try them, and then check your answers. Ready? Begin. All right, so hopefully we have answers for 14 and 15, and if not, then pause when we get done with 14 and you check, do 15 and then check it. So we have to start with our order of operations, which are our parentheses in this case. So hopefully you just saw that one was pretty simple. A whole number plus a fraction is just the whole number with the fraction side by side. 5 plus 3/9 is just simply 5 3/9. That was nice of them to make it a little easier for us. And then we're going to multiply it by 1/4, which you said, yeah, I can't do that, right? You've got to make that an improper fraction. So hopefully you went through the steps of start at the bottom, multiply, add, that's your numerator, keep your denominator. 9 times 5 is 45, plus 3 is 48, and your denominator was 9, so you have 48/9. Then we can multiply it by 1/4. How? Well, we multiply straight across. So I have 1 times the 48, and 4 times the 9, which is 36, and then I reduce and I convert into a mixed number. 36 goes into 48 one time. When I subtract, I have a remainder of 12. So my remainder is my numerator, my divisor is my denominator, and I have 1, but I can reduce, right? I could reduce by 2, but then I'd have to reduce by 2 again, and then I have to reduce by 3. Or you could just reduce by 12 to begin with, because 12 does go into 12 one time, and 12 goes into 36 3 times. So your final answer should have been 1 1/3. So on this one, hopefully you saw, and if you haven't done it, pause it, work it, and then come back to me. You saw that in the order of operations, I know that I have my deer that has to be done first from left to right before I have my Aunt Sally, which is my addition and subtraction from left to right. I have to start with my multiplication. When I multiply across. 3 times 1 is 3 and 5 times 2 is 10. That one can't be reduced, so I'm going to move on. This one's out front in my math problem. This is the answer to go here. Have to keep it in that order. If not, I'm going to have a problem. I'm going to have a negative fraction, which is a real thing. We are not ready for them. Keep them in order then. The 9/10 stays in front minus the 3/10. They made it nice and easy for me. I have my common denominator, so I keep it, and then I just simply subtract my numerators. So I end up with 6/10, and then I reduce. 2 goes into both of them because they're even, and I end up with 3/5. Now I know these are a little fast, but you did the work on your own. Anytime I go too fast, just pause the video and then continue on. All right, so this is all going to be extra work in case you're struggling, having questions with the story problems, the mixed numbers, the fractions, and then all these multi-stepped. I'm more than happy to help you through, okay? The biggest key is just following along and paying attention, building that muscle memory, and then that way when you have your homework time, you have all of these notes to go back to and look at. Also have your math folder every day so that when I mention something like, how do I make a mixed number into an improper fraction? You know how to do that. All right, so your homework is back into our big book, page 85, you have 2 through 13, and then on page 86, you have 1 through 6. If you have any questions on the multiplying fractions, please come and ask.